Hello, and welcome to Organizing Change on an Industry Level. I'm Sedera Ranaivoarinosy, and I'm really excited to be hosting this session today and to take you some of the ways industries are rethinking their processes and changing their strategies in order to reduce their impact on the environment and to improve the work of conditions of their employees. So we have quite a bit to get through today, so I think we'll just get started very quickly. We're starting our discussion today talking about startups because they're seen as agile structures, beacons of innovation, and so they have a specific and very interesting role that they can play in changing industrial methods and offsetting the effects that traditional industry has had on the environment. So to speak about this, I'm excited to welcome Alexandre Micheloud, who is the co-founder of UHCS Constructions. And we also have with us Susan Graham, who's the co-founder of Dendra Industries, Dendra Systems, actually. Sorry. Hi, Susan. And who's joining us from Australia. So to get started, I want to ask both of you, what led you to decide to act outside of traditional industry in order to foster change in your respective fields?
Perfect. So may I start? So for everyone to know what we are doing, we're UHCS Constructions. We are a young company that's actually developing a prefabricated construction system made of composite materials based on a recycled plastic material. And our goal is to build rapidly structures that can allow to build houses, social houses, and all of this. So I think there's three reasons why we set ourselves on this path. The first one is, of course, an environmental crisis. If you look at the volumes of wastes that are generated by the construction industry, they're enormous. They're probably the biggest in the world, of course, because there's lots of earth to be moved around. But we thought that if we could reuse a material that itself was waste before, and that we can use a production technology to build a product that can last for many decades and that you can itself recycle afterwards, that would be a great step towards having less waste in the industry. Secondly, there's a social crisis. I think if you look at every country in the world and you look at the amount of houses and of flats that people actually need, it's growing every year. So the gap between the growing population and the growing, let's say, real estate park is widening itself. So that's why we are developing this system to build extremely rapidly so we can actually provide a solution to solve this problem. And the third one we believe is an innovation crisis. There is lots of inertia in the industry. So if solutions don't come from outside, we don't think that the traditional players will have a pressure to act. So this is why we are doing what we are doing.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Susan, how about you?
For us, it's really looking at the state of the world. At the moment, we're still on this carbon path. We're not in a carbon cycle. And the rate of loss of biodiversity is 10 times higher than it's been for the last 10 million years. Land degradation outcompetes land restoration. And none of this really makes sense until you realize that we're lacking the tools. For us, we saw this challenge that's facing the environment and facing humanity, and saw ourselves as being able to create the toolkit to rebalance our natural world and empower humanity to do that. And at the same time, we see the appetite from the investment landscape. You've got Silicon Valley. Now, it's a valley. That's a natural structure. It's a green valley. And we see the investors that are out there that more and more want to invest in high growth returns, but also to invest in a sustainable future and sustainable companies. And so it's the right time, and it's something that we are now compelled to do. These are things that we ought to do.
Can you just remind the audience what it is that Dendra Systems does, just to set the scene?
Yes, yeah. I take you on the journey of Dendra. We are building the tools for environmental restoration. Now, what do I mean by that? We provide data capture through drones, analytics. So this is where we've got ecology-trained machine learning to empower environmental project managers to make better decisions. We often think about restoration as just this moment of planting a tree, but really it's 20 years of management and restoration. And then what we have is drones which go out and plant the trees. So they are there at that moment, flying above and achieving scale that we have increased capacity 10x every year for the last 5 years.
Okay, that's a very ambitious project, and we can see the link very directly as to how this answers the question of offsetting the negative impacts of the way we've been conducting business and having, conducted industry until now. So I was wondering, what was the reaction of traditional players when you entered the market and you came with this solution? And how has that evolved as the company has grown and as your impact also has materialized?
Yeah, when you look at traditional players, there are a number of responses, and some are very surprised. One of our advisors and investors, Tom Chi, has a saying, doing is the best kind of thinking. And the rate of change within our company is so high that one of our early customers, when we delivered on a project much more quickly than he expected, and delivered on his needs much more quickly than he expected, he said, I'm going to need to be careful about what I tell you guys, because you actually do it. We've never had a contractor move as quickly as you have. So when we look at our customers, we are very different from their alternative in terms of suppliers. And when you look at the investment space, this is where the counter is actually true. A lot of investors are used to seeing enormous amounts of data when they make a decision. And when we're looking at investing in the natural world, up until now, there hasn't really been high quality data. You've got satellite data, sure, we can see the world, but you can't see it in the resolution and with the information that you need to make those decisions. And so this is where they're saying, oh, we're delighted by this because it brings us the information we're more comfortable with.
Okay, interesting. And there was no sort of reticence to what you were proposing or backlash of any kind?
I think 6 years ago, there was, and that was at a time where drones were still new. Everyone got a drone for Christmas the year after that, it seemed. And so that fear of automation very quickly changed to a realization of empowerment. And as part of our mission, we want to empower people. We're not looking to replace people. That is completely counter to our purpose. And so we're being part of the way that people can operate and caring for livelihoods, caring for the environment, and caring for the future generations. That is how we've engaged people. And so where there might have been those anxieties in the past, they don't exist going forwards.
Okay. And so I'm interested in turning to you now, Alexandre, because your project is still much younger than Dendra Systems. You're delivering your first prototype in a month. Exactly. For the modular house. And so forgive me for the sort of easy play on words, but you're evolving in an industry that's very much set in stone, or at least that has processes and things that seem hard to budge. So how has your response been?
Yeah. So it's very interesting. So very early on, we figured that we had to form a working group of various experts because our project is touching both the plastics, industry, plastics processing, and construction. So we had architects, we had civil engineers, mechanical engineers, extrusion professionals, and at the beginning it was a bit it was very interesting because all of them came from the different background, different field, very good in what they were doing. It was really hard for them to approach a new project like this and hear from the other experts, what are the limitations on their side, and really to listen. I think I was surprised there was quite some ego, in this expert type of field. But we had to take some shortcuts, of course. Otherwise, we would not have made it with this prototype by June this year. So we had to cut some things that we would go back to afterwards. But yeah, like you said, it's an industry that's very much set in stone. There's no harmonized norms for what we are doing. So we have to now start a process, to obtain a European technical assessment for our product. And so there again, a bunch of organizations and experts need to assemble themselves to really define, the technical properties that we need to attain to construct on this and that market. So it's a long discussion, between the experts and let's say the innovators in a way.
But you're hopeful.
Of course, yeah, 100%. So it's going to be quite a long process, but we're really hopeful that by next year we can have our first, certified product that we can deliver on the first social house made from UHCS. And demonstrate it to the players so they can actually see that it can work and it's certified.
Awesome. And so you mentioned something, Susan, that rings quite important to me about engaging people. And there's something to be said about the importance of engaging, obviously, the different economic players that you both are going to be working with. But there's also, when you're carrying such a strong social and environmental message, you need to embark the people that you work with and internally have an organization so that this sort of external commitment is also reflected inside your organization. So I was wondering, and I know you guys are in different stages in your companies, but how your own CSR strategies have been integrated from the beginning of your projects. And maybe, Susan, if you want to start.
No, that's a really great question. The catchphrase that is perhaps overused of, you have to be the change you want to see in the world. It has truth to it. And part of who we are, we've been described as an innovation catalyst. So externally, we create all of this change around us with our customers, with contractors, investors, other partners. And I often joke that we have our team, but we also see everybody else as part of Team Dendra. So whenever we sign up a customer, I'm like, I joke that, okay, great, you're now on Team Dendra, you're working with us. And the same with pretty much anybody we engage. And so when they're joining Team Dendra, they're joining a set of values. And so we've got 4 values of we're courageous, we're making it happen, we're persistently positive, and we're in this together. And we see those values as pretty core when you internalize the mission. You internalize these values of social responsibility and for the environment. And so that's not just us saying, we're courageous and we're going after really big targets and we're looking at the 1 billion hectares that we can restore to make real change in the world. We also internalize that on a day-to-day basis, whether we're using recycled toilet paper in our offices or, on Earth Day, going out collecting litter, but also when we're on the job. We see it as something that when we look at our pricing models, we want to price for the right outcome. We don't want incentives which encourage people just doing the 9 to 5. We want incentives that encourage people to get the best for our customers, the best for their environment. And we see that as something that's very important, because otherwise you might not end up with a robust company. And we want to make sure that our company is as robust as possible, so that the mission will always ring true.
And how about you, Alexandre? What team size do you have right now?
So internally we're 3 people, but if you count all the experts that are outside, we're about 10 to 12, I would say. So for us, it's interesting because our ambition is to instill a licensing or franchising business model, however you call it. We have patents in over 90 countries. So right now we have been for 2.5 years working on the core R&D of the product, and every day from the start, we've been thinking, okay, we need to acquire all this knowledge, and then we have to transfer it, to a licensee or a franchisee over the next years. So of course, there you have a great responsibility when you choose your licensee and your franchisee to actually impose not only business objectives and targets on them, but also CSR targets, in how they must treat their employees when they're going to build this modular structure in a warehouse, for example. So it's something we've been thinking about every day. And our product is very supply chain, sensitive, let's say. There's many different subcontractors, to make our final product. So it's also our job to understand, okay, how do they power their plant? How do they treat their employees? And I think it's what, large companies who are all, committing to 2050 net zero. Yeah. As a company, probably you can do it, but it's really difficult to check this on your supply chain when you have maybe 15,000 subcontractors. So so we're working on these two aspects.
Okay, so we're getting close to the end of our talk, and I want to get a little deeper into what kind of collaboration there is between you as startups and traditional actors, because what we know, if we follow the news a little, is that averting the worst effect of climate change won't happen without collaboration between all business actors. And so we've kind of hinted at the bridges that start to get made, but I want to know if there are any specific experiences that you can speak about to attest to that bridge forming and being more fluid. And maybe you can also tell us if there's something more you need, and that both in the structure of the market and within the traditional industry players themselves, in order for those collaborations to keep growing, so that you keep building solutions together.
This comes back to the point of, we see everybody on Team Dendra, because you need all of those collaborations to make our vision a reality. And so you need the incentives in place. And for us, that's not only regulation, which in terms of biodiversity is fairly well enforced in many regions of the world. And that allows people to see the same vision as Dendra does. But that's not consistent everywhere. We still, although we are providing tools to help mature some of these markets, we also need governments to support that. And so, and the same is for private industry. Often in this space, private industry leads government. It's not waiting for governments to implement regulation. As Alexandre said, where many companies are setting their own targets and commitments and being far more audacious than many governments around the world in terms of how they achieve that. And so when we're looking for companies, we need to look for good, for-profit companies. Dendra is one of those, and we want to see collaborations with other companies that see long-term sustainability in in their profits that are embedded in a for good purpose as well. And so when you look at these collaborations, you've got to get the incentives in place. You've got to make sure that finance works for them, because at the end of the day, they've got business to run. They've got their stakeholders and shareholders, but you can't do that when that's at tension with government regulation or lack of government regulation. And so we see that as one of the critical things that needs to stay in place when it's there, and to be implemented where it's not, so that everyone can have a mindset of what should be, and that it's not just a mindset, they can actually implement it.
Do you have anything
I can totally second what Susan has been saying. You know, for us, we've been working quite on stealth mode for the last year and a half. So from the time we'll have a prototype, it's going to be much more open, you know, to, we're actually inviting all construction players, companies who could fit in our supply chain to come to our, to come to our warehouse to actually, touch, smell, and see this prototype, to actually, see it as something real, and not only see the, the regulatory, steps that are in front of us, but that can actually, modelize this modular system and put it into their architectural projects. So for us, of course, like I said, it's a lot about signaling. So we had to, work with the best engineers and the laboratories in Switzerland to also have their name on the, on the project, because otherwise it's a very difficult industry to enter into if you don't have anyone who can open doors. But going forward, what we really need is a large construction company that would open its its doors to an innovation that's actually a bit outside the typical trends that we see on 3D printing, zero carbon cement. But we believe that the right way to go is to have a bunch of different innovations and see in which contexts one is better than the other. The world is complex. You need to have many different solutions.
Great. Well, I think that's a perfect closing word for our first part of the conversation. Thank you so much, Alexandre, and thank you, Susan, for connecting in the evening for you down under. So we'll now move on to the second part of our talk, and I'm happy to welcome Olivier Colleau, who's the CEO of Kiloutou, which our European viewers will probably know from whenever they needed to rent something or for refurbishing their house. So thank you. You can come and sit down. So, hello, Olivier.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
Good, thank you.
Okay. So we're going to have a more intimate one-to-one chat. So thank you for being with us today. From what I understand it, Kiloutou has initially a family business and has always been committed to sustainability. Can you tell us a little bit more about where that history comes from, and what at the beginning, like in the 80s when the company was founded, was it already a concept that was very set, maybe not with the name CSR that we know today, but was it a very conscious thing, or is it just because, things just happen to be like that?
Yes, indeed. Kiloutou is not a young company. We are not a startup. We are a mid-aged company. We were set up 40 years ago now. As you said, we are renting equipment construction equipment to companies and private individuals who did build home, flats, renovate roads, etc. When we were set up, as you said, our mission was not to to protect the planet or to protect the Earth, but where CSR, and I don't know whether CSR did exist at the time, but where CSR did ring a bell to us is especially on social commitments. That is, we employ, and this is my great pride, we employ more than 5,000 employees, and we were always committed to give a job to these people, to protect them, to give development. So social commitments were clearly embedded in our DNA. And then environmental dimension did make sense, especially related to the business we do. Actually, renting an equipment is a sharing an equipment. That is, our business is about making sure that an equipment, once it has been manufactured, will be shared and used by the largest number of customers and maintained to live as long as possible. So to that extent, renting an equipment rental is an environmental friendly business, and our professional association did calculate that owning an equipment is reducing CO2 by 50% as compared to owning its own fleet of equipment.
Interesting. And so have you, in your history, then been able to calculate how much CO2 might have been prevented from the fact that your customers were renting this equipment instead of owning it themselves?
We did it actually 3 times. The first time was 10 years ago now. And the third time was last year, when we decided to update our CO2 emissions calculation and to communicate and to take commitments on this. And this is what we did earlier on this year, where we committed ourselves to reduce our direct emissions by 40% by 2030 and to target carbon neutrality by 2050. And this, of course, is an ambition, but this is also relying on very concrete action plans with a number of levels. One is to reduce the carbon emission of our stores, of our buildings. We operate 500 stores, and we have started to reduce the carbon emissions of these stores by using LED lights, by recovering rainwater to wash equipment. Another lever, significant lever, is to shift our equipment, our fleet, towards non-petrol equipments. And the third lever is also to improve or to reduce the CO2 impact of our trucks. And here also we are shifting from diesel trucks to hybrid or electric trucks and vehicles. And this year we have already replaced 500 vehicles, shifting to hybrid and electrics.
Okay. Well, you stole my transition from me. That's okay.
Sorry for that.
No, don't worry. It means, you know, the conversation's flowing. That's all we're asking for. What drove you to take such a strong stance? Because these numbers that you are aiming for, I couldn't help but notice that they are in line with the objectives that we need for the planet at large to reach if we want to avoid the worst effects of climate change. Was there a particular moment or reason where you said that, you know, pushed you to say we have to really get down to business now?
Well, I think the planet and the climate requires that we act now. I think everybody is convinced of this. There is another topic that was clearly really struck me last year, which is the following paradox. When we look at our CO2 emissions, we see that actually only 6% of them are direct. That is, we can only have an action of 6% of them, so we will do it. But 44% of our emissions are indirect. And among these, 63% are coming from the fleet that our customers are using. So I don't have personally any direct impact because I'm not using the fleet, but we clearly said, okay, if we want collectively to have an action, to have a strong impact, we need to work collectively, and this is why we decided to embark in this journey, our complete ecosystem, including our suppliers, the companies manufacturing the fleet, but also our customers, contractors using the fleet. So this is a new decision, a new initiative that we made this year to act not only as a company alone, but to act as a complete ecosystem within the construction.
Okay, and so can you tell us a little bit more about how this process is being implemented? Was it difficult to get everyone to join in these discussions?
The first thing was to decide to make it, and this is what we did, what we agreed at the end of last year. And then we contacted our main suppliers and our main contractors and proposed to them, well, let's try to tackle this together. And actually we invited, and this was last week, we invited our main customers, large construction companies, our main suppliers, equipment manufacturers, and we also invited institutionals. We did it last week, and we had 50 companies being there. It was actually what was clearly telling me that it was a good direction is that everybody did come. That is when we made this invitation, and I guess everyone receives a lot of invitation. Everyone did say yes, and when we had to change the date because of the government decision to, because of the restrictions, we had to delay by 1 day the date, and this was a last minute change. Everybody did manage to come at this meeting. So this clearly means that this topic does make sense to our industry. So we had a kickoff last week with 50 managers around the table. The purpose was not to discuss about do we believe that the planet is in danger? Does it make sense? I guess everyone was convinced about it as we were all in the same room. The topic was to be much more pragmatic because actually the common point of all these people was that we were managing companies. So we had concrete levels to make decisions on shifting the equipment we will buy or having an impact on the way we build companies. So this was a first step last week, and we will have concrete actions going on following this first meeting.
Is there an example of actions that you can already tell us about?
Yes, we actually, since I said that this meeting was clearly highly pragmatic related to the construction equipment, we identify five concrete actions. One of these is to compare the various technologies. That is when we are talking about non-diesel equipment. You may discuss or you may identify electric. You may identify biofuel, you may identify hydrogen. Which one is the best of this? I don't know. So identify that clearly we have to make a study and we have to make analysis to identify the CO2 impact of these various technologies and to identify the availability of these technologies. So clearly one topic, very pragmatic topic, is comparing between themselves the available technologies. Another topic was is the economics around this, because for sure we are all willing to shift towards this transition, but this needs also to make sense or to be feasible for the economic standpoint. So we also identified the need to make the calculation of the total cost of ownership of an equipment, because to make it very simple, an electric equipment today is more expensive than a traditional diesel equipment, but since you are going to keep it for 8, 10 or 12 years, it will cost less in terms of energy. So we have to make this calculation. Another topic which also is, to me, highly important is how do we calculate the CO2 emission? It's relatively easy to make a Euro calculation. Making CO2 calculation it's not easy. So we said that we need, as a team, as an industry, to agree on common standards to calculate this CO2 emission. And at the end, this should help us making decisions to shift towards more responsible equipment, but also to making proposals to institutions and the French governments to support the overall industry in this the transition from diesel to non-diesel equipments.
Okay, and do you have outside actors helping you in running these discussions? Because it seems, I mean, it gets very technical, especially when you talk about impact measurement and stuff. Is that something that you brought in yourself, or how were you being, helped through this whole process?
Yes, indeed. We were not on our own to do this. We got the support from Jean-Marc Jancovici, I guess, who is famous here at ChangeNOW. So the support of Jean-Marc Jancovici, he was with us for this first meeting, and the team of Jean-Marc at Carbon 4. So clearly they will bring us a lot of support to provide facts and objectivity in this work, because we clearly want this to be as I said, a factual, but also pragmatic and fact-based, analytical proposals.
Okay, so this is clearly the beginning of a fairly long process for you, because arguably we could say that you and these 50 companies, and who knows, maybe more in the future, are in this together for the next at least 10 years in working with this. What does success look like for this project? How do you, evaluate when you've started making progress and even saying that you've done good?
Yeah, well, as you said, this meeting was the first step. I believe it was a success because everyone did commit to making this and commit to work on these matters. We will have other meetings. The next one is planned at the autumn, where we will have the results of the analysis that we launched with Carbon 4. We will track progress. That is on our side at Kiloutou. We will track the number of non-diesel equipment that we will buy year on year. And clearly, as I said earlier, the purpose is to have at the end, to have only non-diesel equipment in our fleet, and we will do this also with our industry. So I am confident that in the fact that it is feasible. It's not, for sure, it's not easy, but I think it's feasible. But to make it possible, we need to act again as an ecosystem. And what was striking me is that everyone in this meeting that we launched was recognizing that he could not succeed on its own. We clearly need to have everyone sharing the same views and going in the same direction. So, yeah, please invite me next year, and I will be pleased to share results or at least progress.
Well, I mean, I've written it down, and I think all the other people at ChangeNOW have written it down now. And so I'm going to go kind of in the same field that I did with the people that we spoke before, because this, in the discussions as you've been describing them, it seems that it's a kind of an executive people, circle that are involved now. How are you sharing this work that you're doing with the rest of your employees, and how do you make sure that they also engage with these, core transformation discussions that you're having?
I'm sharing this because actually employees are asking for that. That is. We clearly see more and more people saying, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing for me, for the planet? And it's, obviously, we can say it's young people, but not only. So clearly, our people at Kiloutou are asking us to act on these topics. And when we made the decision to take the lead and organize this event, clearly we know that many people were proud about it, were informed about it, and now are asking for, okay, what's next? What do we do? And we have, as you said, to embark our people, because I am an executive. I am not the one driving the equipment on a job site. We have people to do this, so they need to do it, because this will require a number of changes on their own. For the mechanics people we have, they will not have the same job, because it's not the same to maintain diesel equipment and an electric equipment. Our salespeople will not have the same job. It will be different also at the customer side. So we need to embark our people. What is really exciting to me is that actually it's we have a strong demand. So it's challenging, but we have a strong demand from our people to move ahead.
Great. And so will your employees also be consulted, because you mentioned the impacts that the changes might have? You were talking about the different efficiencies of fuels that they might use. Will they, in terms of what that impact would be and how hard it would be for them to face it. Are they also going to be included in that reflection in the data collection that you need?
They are included actually because there are a number of things where we will need them. That is one of the topics that we identified last week. One of the 5 initiatives was clearly the conduct of change, and to say, okay, what do people need in order to make this feasible? So we will involve them on our side, on the side of our customers, on the side of our manufacturers, to say, okay, if we want to move from diesel equipment to hydrogen, what does it mean to you? What will be the change in your work? Can we make a test? Because we have started to make experiment with new equipment. So this clearly this job will rely obviously on people acting, on our employees making experiments and moving forward.
Great. Well, thank you so much for all your insights and for this very inspiring, dynamic of bringing people together all across your value chain. So we will now be moving on to the next part of our conversation, where we'll go a little step further also in the scale of change that we're talking about. We're going to try to figure out how we make change institutional, because as exemplified by Kiloutou's initiative, coalitions are growing fast in the fight against the devastating effects of climate change. We all have the great milestone of the 2015 Paris Agreements in mind, where countries came together, but it seems that we're still behind on our objectives. So beyond the talking, how do we enact change on a global level? So to answer this, I'm very pleased to welcome Aditi Maheshwari, who's the Director for Climate Action at the UN Secretary General's Executive Office, Spencer Harrison, who's the Associate Professor of Organisational Behaviour at INSEAD, and Pierre Abadie, who's the Executive Director and Co-Head of Energy Transition Practice at Tikehau Capital. Thank you all for being here online from your different areas of the world. So to get started on our talk here, I want to address the first question to you, Aditi. The UN Secretary General recently said that the drive for net zero emissions must become the new normal for everyone, everywhere, across business actors, international players of all kinds. And the IEA has recently published a roadmap to net zero by 2050, which gives us hope that if that particular state of mind is adopted, then we might not be all lost. So what priority changes must industry at large make today to play its full part in the transition?
Thank you, Sedera, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me to this conference. I think it's a great question, and I'd like to start by providing some context to my response by sharing with you a brief overview of the Secretary General's priorities on climate and the work we do to support their implementation, particularly regarding fostering industry transformation and decarbonization. So the Secretary General has called for 2021 to be the moment when humanity makes peace with nature and sets the world on course to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. To do this, he's outlined 3 priorities: mitigating greenhouse gas emissions, adapting to climate impacts, and ensuring public and private finance contribute to solving the climate emergency. So how does this relate to industry? On mitigation, as you mentioned, we're building a global coalition for net zero emissions by mid-century with strong 2030 targets. Every country, every city, every company, and every industry needs to come on board with concrete plans and immediate actions. This means that industry must step up ambition from the hard-to-abate sectors, be it steel or cement or shipping and aviation to land transport and buildings. They must all have an action plan for net zero by 2050 with concrete intermediate goals and implementation plans for 2025 and 2030. These targets need to be scientifically robust and aligned to 1.5 degrees Celsius and be able to be improved over time. on adaptation, we must also prepare, adapt, and build resilience. We need a breakthrough on adaptation. And for industry, this would include understanding their exposure to climate risks across their entire production and supply chains, and integrating these risks into all investment decision making so that they don't lose profitability down the line. On finance, we need to ensure that all financial flows are Paris compatible. For industry, this means shifting investments, making use of innovative financial instruments to support their transition, and developing consumer-friendly metrics to express how their investments and products align with their climate targets and overall pathways to net zero. Industry also has to be prepared for a wholesale shift in public and private finance. Financial institutions are already recognizing the risks of continuing to finance carbon-intensive industries and sectors, and especially when alternatives exist within the sector that can give similar financial returns with lower carbon footprints. And we've sort of been hearing about these examples earlier today. Those that can transition quickly will see a huge market opportunity. And the IEA's report hints to this. It shows that we can get to a net zero energy sector by 2050. And energy is the main source of emissions for industry. The report tells us that the technologies needed to achieve the necessary deep cuts in global emissions by 2030 already exist. The economics exist. And this is huge because to stand a chance, like a fighting chance to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, we have to reduce emissions by 45% from 2010 levels by 2030 and reach net zero emissions by 2050 at the latest. So we really do think this is happening. We're hearing the wheels turning on this. We've got examples coming through. And so what are we doing to try and support this? I can go into this in a bit more detail later, but just to flag that there are a lot of existing initiatives and multi-stakeholder partnerships that were launched at the Secretary General's 2019 Climate Summit. And we're working to help these address challenges and exploit opportunities to support the industry transition, working both on the demand and supply of industrial outputs and shining a light on enablers such as finance and existing solutions that can be leveraged. I would just like to flag one other thing, which is that cities on the demand side are leading the way on climate commitments, and they will be significant drivers for demanding green cement, steel, buildings and infrastructure construction for public fleets of electric vehicles and charging infrastructure to support them for smart grid technology. So as our partners here that we've been hearing from are talking about their industry opportunities and they're engaging their supply chains, on the demand side, strongly recommend engaging with the cities and making sure that everything that's done is credible. Corporate net zero strategies need to be putting science at their core.
Thank you for that. And we'll definitely go back later to how the UN can support these efforts, because there's been calls from one of our previous guests here today about international collaboration and how regulation can really help in fostering change at the global level, change that's uniform across different countries. But I want to jump on something that you said specifically concerning finance, and here my question goes to Pierre Abadie, who's here with us today, because the drastic changes that you call for in your call, Aditi, really just demand a total rewiring of where our investments are going on a global scale. In terms of finding money for the transition, we know of using tax incentive or punitive ways to do things, but there are other ways. And for example, Pierre, you run a energy transition fund that actually finances decarbonization strategies. And can you tell us a little bit more about what exactly that is? And is it hard to fund that or not today?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you very much. What I hear now is just music to my ears, in fact. What we have done since 2018 within Tikehau, so Tikehau is an asset manager. which means that we are collecting the global saving and we are investing into the real economy to finance, projects or companies. On our side, what we have decided is to invest directly into the energy transition, and we started that in 2018. When we say this at the time, I've got a very strong echo. In fact, I can hear myself.
I see people in the back trying to figure that out.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly well.
Okay, so basically, when we launched this fund, the idea was to be aligned with the EIA and what the GIEC or the IPC was telling us, which is basically what we hear. If we want to reach the 1.5 degrees target, we need to halve the CO2 emission by 2030. But what does it mean in other terms? That means that basically, for example, for a country like France, we need to come back to the CO2 emission of 78. So by 2030, which means that within 3,000 days, we need to unfold roughly 40 years of unsustainable development. Now, what we've got with the last report of the EIA that was released last week, in fact, is a clear path and clear milestone. And what they said is that indeed technology is very important by 2050, but by 2030, what is key is to massify existing technologies to be able to make this shift. I mean, our economy is running right now with real industry, with real companies, and the aim is to make the shift. What are the three main levers that has been identified? First is development of renewable. And this we do, but this will accelerate. In fact, will be multiplied by 4 by 2030. Then it's penetration of the low carbon mobility. And here, speaking about a 20 times fold increase in terms of sales of electric vehicles. And then the last one is the energy efficiency. You need globally to improve the energy efficiency of the system by 4% per year, where we were basically able to improve it by 2%. Until now. When you look at the amount at stake, we are speaking about roughly 4 trillion of investment every year over the next 10 years to do so. So that's why, the finance, public finance and private finance need to partner to be able to do such a thing. When we have launched our fund within Tikehau, we have used our own balance sheet money to align our interests with our investor. And this gives a lot of confidence to the people. We have worked with sovereign fund. So when we have launched the fund, we have been investing 100 million into the fund. We managed to discuss with the French sovereign fund, the bank BPI. We have worked with the EIF, the European Investment Fund. We have worked with the sovereign fund as well of Belgium. And we managed to have 100 million from them as well. We have worked with the industrial partner because the real economy is the real economy. That put 100 million as well into the fund, which was total at the time. And from that, we raised more money and we reached 1 billion euro. What do we do with those billion euro? We are investing directly into the SMEs that are active currently on our economy. And we're trying to massify solutions around industry, around buildings, around renewable, around low carbon mobility. What does it mean in practice? For example, we have been investing into a company that is called Green Yellow in France, that is providing energy efficiency solution and renewable solution for retail, supermarkets. So what do? We install solar panel on the rooftop, but we also, for example, install plenty of fridge doors on all the open fridge that you can see on the supermarkets. On a yearly basis, we are installing like 200 kilometers of fridge doors. When you look at the amount of electricity that is saved by doing so, we are speaking about roughly the electricity consumption of a town like Paris. Basically, Green Yellow activity, through their project over their lifetime, is avoiding 600,000 tons of CO2 per year. 600,000 tons of CO2 is roughly, 600,000 return flight Paris-New York, for example. So it's huge. We have made another company, Groupe Rognon, buildings in Paris. building renovation. Why building renovation? Because 46% of the emission of Paris are made through building heatings. Groupe Rognon having the unique opportunity every 50 years to renovate a building, an Haussmannian building. When you remove the roof, then you put insulation, you change the window, you change the boilers, you regulate it, and by doing so, you can reduce by 20, 30, even 40% the energy consumption of a building. Their activity in 2019 allowed to avoid 200,000 tons of CO2. This is what we call massification of the investment and shifting the real economy, awaiting the new tech, if you want.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for that insight into really giving us concrete examples, so to me, I hear you, Pierre, I hear Aditi speaking about the scientific data that we have. And so I want to ask you, Spencer, a question, because with what they've just told us, we see that there's plenty of scientific data, of roadmaps, of solutions that exist, that are written by trusted people, trusted scientists, that drive home the fact that we are, in fact, in a climate emergency. Yet large-scale behavioral change isn't happening at the speed that we need it to. And you study how we integrate innovative practices in business and how we, latch on to new narratives in order to change our behaviors. So why is it that all this information doesn't, drive the change?
Yeah, so Sedera, years ago, I remember standing on a diving board for the first time and looking into the water and having just seen several of my classmates jump into the water and then safely emerge, and yet I was terrified. And I think that there's a large percentage of the population that hears what we're talking about, and they hear about the amazing work that was just described, and it still feels terrifying for them the same way it felt terrifying for me to jump off that diving board. And very often when we begin to bring in these statistics and we begin to bring in this knowledge around how the world is changing, we're actually putting our colleagues and our friends and our family members on these metaphorical diving boards and saying, you need to jump into this water and I promise that you're going to be okay. But that's not actually how most change happens, at least sustainable change for individuals. In fact, years ago, what we found was that by giving people kind of a smaller platform to jump off of, and then a smaller platform where they jump into water, and then raising it a little bit by bit, you can actually bring people across that bridge to change rather than forcing them to come to a crossroads and jump. And that's what we've discovered over the last 5 years is we've looked at organizations in the circular economy that are trying to get off the ground these amazing sorts of innovations that we've heard about that could have a fundamental impact on the way that we each conduct life on a day-to-day basis. And the trick is that sometimes we become so convinced around the reality of change and what needs to happen that we bring people to this crossroads where they either jump or they pull back. And we make it a black or white decision around whether or not they're going to be with us or against us. And instead, what we're learning through behavioral change and some of these, startups that we're hearing about and smaller organizations is that they're doing a better job in what I call bridging. And what they do then is they invite people to make small, steady steps across a bridge with them that really is encouraged by curiosity and this sense of optimism and hope and what could happen in the future.
Okay, and so it makes me think, and maybe through this we can get to exactly, for example, how the UN can support large efforts, because the past year and a half that we've lived, we've definitely noticed that when people are faced with a crisis, even in business, they've managed to change how they do things and sometimes even halt their actions altogether, because with lockdowns that have happened all over the world, we know and we've seen that we have a capacity for change. So how do we mobilize that capacity for climate change now? And what support can we give that, both in terms of storytelling strategies that you were mentioning, or actual support, institutional or regulatory or regulation support that we can bring together? So maybe, Aditi, if you want to take the first jab at the question.
Thanks, Sedera. So just in terms of building on what was just said about, it's difficult to jump. And that's why partnerships are critical in this space. And that collaboration, ensuring that people are know that they're not in it alone and are working together, developing the solutions, identifying best practices, exchanging knowledge, building capacity, and doing that technology development deployment piece. It's critical, and that's part of what we have been trying to support. The Secretary General at the Climate Action Summit in 2019, they launched about 41 initiatives across a range of sectors, from finance to buildings and cities to nature-based solutions, adaptation, resilience, energy, transport. Name a sector is sort of covered. And in that context, these initiatives were launched as multi-stakeholder initiatives, bringing together the public sector and the private sector to collectively develop these solutions that are necessary. And that's what we've been trying to support and drive forward, and make sure that these are delivering on the ground, demonstrating the proof of concept, showcasing that ambition can be raised in line with the science and what's needed, and then allowing that to generate the degree of comfort necessary amongst the policymakers and the regulators to embed this into their plans around the nationally determined contributions, their net zero strategies after 2050, that then again reinforce and provide the market signals necessary for investors and other real economy actors to move forward. And just an example of that was sort of like the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, which came together and has really become the gold standard in terms of what the financial sector is doing, where you've brought pension funds together and large asset owners from around the world, and they are really setting concrete targets in terms of decarbonizing their portfolios, then working with their asset managers and investees to drive that change forward in the real economy with interim credible targets between 2025, 2030 moving forward. And you're seeing this being replicated. So Mark Carney and his team, Mark Carney being a special envoy for the Secretary General on Climate Finance, is convening the Glasgow Finance Alliance, which is bringing together these Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, Asset Managers Alliance. They're bringing together banks and other parts of the financial sector to come together and really mobilize behind this net zero objective. So they're not in it alone. And I think that's the key point, that you need that partnership and collaboration.
Okay, perfect. We have 35 seconds left. So if Spencer or Pierre, you want to add a little something to that, you have a little bit amount of time.
So if I could just jump in and build on what Aditi said. So she mentioned right at the start the importance of collaboration, and I would agree completely with that. I would recontextualize that in just a slightly different way. You want to collaborate with people who agree with you about what needs to be done, but are as different from you as possible. And what that does is it provides what we call identity hooks, so that a greater variety of people can look at that collaboration and say, oh, that sounds like something that I could be involved in, or that my ideals or values are represented by. And when that happens, then we build a coalition of a large group of people that are willing to be engaged, rather than a small group of like-minded people, but that don't reach out to other people because they don't have those additional identity hooks. So collaboration is key because it signals people like me are involved in this. And we want to have as many different people involved to really make this stick from a behavioral perspective.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much to the three of you for taking the time to speak with us here at ChangeNOW. We're really delighted to have you. And we'll check back next year on whether we've caught up on the, the lateness that we have today. Thank you so much. And we're now going to move on to our last talk for this session. And for that, I'm excited to welcome Christoph Delfeld, who is the Director of CSR at GRTgaz. So, Christoph, if you want to come. Hello, Christoph.
Hello, Sedera.
So what we've seen in this conversation today is that achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050 will require nothing short of complete transformation, and particularly that's very true for the energy sector, which is the largest source of the world's carbon emissions. But you, Christophe, are spearheading that particular transition in your company. So can you tell us a little bit more about who exactly is GRTgaz, what do they do, and why did rethinking your strategy regarding the way you conduct business become so crucial today?
Yes. Yes, good question, because indeed the first point is to mention that GRTgaz is an historical energy actor. So we are located just at the middle of the natural gas value chain between production and consumption. So to make it simple, in fact, we have a double mission. So one side is very technical, we built, and then we make sure to transport natural gas from producer to consumers. So it's the technical part, but it's also a public service mission, starting in the last century. So it's a 70 years old service public mission, which consists to ensure the security of supply, to provide a number of services to make sure that the natural gas market can function in a proper way. All this is regulated. It's regulated, or tariffs are regulated. And let's say this service public notion is really part of our DNA today. And to reply your question, but of course, it's not a secret that natural gas is a fossil fuel. So it means that the climate change, it's at the heart of our strategic problematic. And then I would say, in accordance with the logic of carbon accounting, you need first to look at the big picture. So, and the big pictures, when you consider the French case, in France, natural gas represents 120 million tons of CO2. So it's around 1/4 of the French emissions. It's 450 million tons. And then you can start, let's say, to zoom. And when you zoom to GRTgaz, so we are representing 800,000 tons, so it's around 0.6%. So of course, it's key for us to reduce our own footprint. But then, of course, I think what is now a collective challenge, you look to your responsibility in a broader way. So it's why, of course, we also start to collaborate more and more with what we call the scope 3, so meaning the purchasing side, the supply chain, how we can decarbonize our maintenance, how we can decarbonize the building of new installations, the way of working. But it's still not enough. It's still not enough, because we also need, indeed, let's say the GRTgaz climate risk is just the complete natural gas climate risk. So the key question is to ask, what can we do? What can we do to help both upstream to decarbonize natural gas, by what can we replace natural gas to decarbonize it, and how we can help also our customers, let's say the usage side, indeed, to make sure that those new gases can be part of their solution.
Okay. So in this transition that you're making, you're calling it the third gas revolution.
Yes.
What does that mean exactly?
No, absolutely. The third gas revolution, first, it's also to explain that when you look back into the history, you had the first period more than 1 century ago. It was gas produced from coal, so it was coal gasification. It was quite a polluting process, yeah. But it brings some progress to the society. It brings light. Later on, we came to natural gas in the 50s, last century. But then it was about extracting fossil fuel, so meaning carbon, and to put this carbon, to add this carbon in the atmosphere. So here is the issue. And the first gas revolution is how can we replace natural gas by switching progressively, as quickly as possible, of course, to low carbon and renewable gases. So meaning gases which are based on a short life cycle, a short life carbon cycle. I'm not sure to be clear. And to give you some examples, of course, we already have some mature technologies. It's methanization. Then it's fully inspired from circular economy principles. So then the idea is just to use mainly agricultural waste, but it can also be organic waste from cities, and with bacteria, you just create a digestion process which will enable you to produce gas, and this renewable gas will replace natural gas. You also have emerging technologies, so such as pyrogasification, etc. And with those technologies, you can use other type of waste, and let's say waste that would not be valorized otherwise, so some type of wood, plastic, rubber, and with a process based on heat and pressure, you can also produce then a low carbon gases. And I will not be complete, of course, without mentioning hydrogen. Hydrogen is for us, let's say, indeed a key solution for future. As you have seen, Europe is now really seeing hydrogen as a key vector for the energy transition. So we want to be part of this adventure. And maybe one point I also want to mention, because it's important, in our vision, of course, volumes will not increase. In our vision, we trust in energy efficiency. So we also anticipate a world in which gases volumes might decrease by 40%. And in this picture, yes, the strategy can take place. It's important to think about the logistical side of those new gases. We will need to connect producers and consumers. Consumers are expecting in long-term security of supply, flexible supply, and it's where it comes for us. It's where we can find a new place.
Okay. Do you have a sort of, what's the time frame to implement these new technologies in your business?
So in fact, you have different horizons. As I told you, the move is already developing regarding methanization. So for example, we target to have around 12 terawatt-hour in 2030, 40 terawatt-hour. So it's around 10% of the gas consumed in France in 2030. But what it's important is that it means that then we will be on the good slope. Because it means industrialization, it means massification. Then we will be on the good slope to decarbonize fully the gas system around 2020. This is our new horizon anyway, no choice.
No choice. That's what we've been hearing all day, so good to see that everyone's aligned. And so to go back to your to the new strategy that you're putting in place. In 2019 in France, there was a law that passed called La Loi Pacte, which gave businesses the obligation to take environmental and societal issues into account in their strategy and in how they were going to conduct their business. And it even gave businesses the opportunity to write in their company statutes what those values are. And it's called raison d'être, right, in French, which would literally translate to the reason to be or reason to exist.
Yes.
It's a mantra or a manifesto of sorts that acknowledges, the rewards of business beyond the economic results. And so you've written one for GRTgaz. Yes. Can you tell us what it is and who was involved in defining it and how you're implementing it?
Yeah. If I can play with words, indeed, this law really came on purpose for GRTgaz. Because it was for us a very good vehicle to create a connection between sustainable development goals with our strategy. And in fact, the process to build this raison d'être enabled us, in fact, to fit three key objectives. The first one was indeed to enlarge our legitimacy toward a multi-energy system. What was very important for us was also to modernize, to reconnect our historical mission to something, let's say, inspiring, which is, in fact, every morning when you will wake up, you will wake up also to contribute to the decarbonization of the energy system. So it was bringing back sense to our mission. And last but not least, what was very important was to involve all our stakeholders. So it has been a 2 years long process. We had a deep dialogue with most of our different families of stakeholders, because if you really want not to have, I would say, just a communication, a marketing raison d'être, but really a transforming, a structuring raison d'être, you cannot do it without having the adhesion of your stakeholders, starting by your shareholders and your employees. And so it's what we've done, and we had the pleasure to have the unanimous vote, yes, it's okay, vote of our General Assembly last year in October. And so this raison d'être is based on two things. It's first, of course, one sentence, quite easy, short, easy to memorize, which is together enable a secure, affordable and climate neutral future. Each word is very important. Each word can be related to SDGs from the United Nations, in fact. And it's also accompanied by a manifesto, because it was important also to complete this with more concrete strategic commitments. So one is around, of course, our historical mission. We want to continue to be an actor providing security, flexibility, performance into the energy system. The second one is really fully around decarbonization or on decarbonizations in accordance with Paris agreements, as well as helping producers, helping development on green gases. And the three other ones are fully around innovation, employees, stakeholders, because it's all about a collective challenge. We will not manage alone.
So you mentioned employees. How have you been embarking your employees in this core transformation that you're operating today? And you said it yourself, it can't be a marketing mantra. How do you make sure that they also really live and breathe, I guess, this new raison d'être?
Yes. So it's still quite recent, but let's say today, our employees are not stupid. So first, they are fully aware that we have an existential question. We might just disappear if nothing is done. So they really welcome positively this raison d'être, but it's also creating new expectations. So concretely, what does it mean? Is it just a nice sentence, or is it really about a real transformation? And then I think what is important, what should be an obsession, is to make as concrete as possible this raison d'être for employees. And we had the luck last year, indeed. It was the end of, let's say, a strategic CSR policy cycle in 2020. So that we had also last year a large participative period involving all employees to build a new business strategic plan for the next 4 years, as well as a new CSR policies. So that all this has been translated into two simple business ambitions. One related to how do we industrialize the development of renewable gases, and the other one, how do we reinvent our businesses, our practices, because deep innovations, deep changes will be needed.
Okay, and so kind of similar to what we've spoken about, for example, with Olivier Colleau from Kiloutou earlier. This is, a long-term transformation. It involves a lot of people, and there are a lot of interests at stake. So, what does success look like for this process to you? Like, how long does it take, and when will you be satisfied that you've, enacted something good?
Yes, I think that there is not just one answer to your question. But first, I would say that we have already crossed the starting line. We have already taken the turn of the energy transition, but now everything is really about acceleration, about industrialization. So if I project myself in 2030, so I would say I would be happy first, of course, if we have reached our targets. So our targets are, for example, aligned with Paris Agreement. So if we reach them, so it means we are really contributing to the climate challenge. The same for renewable gases. If we have more than 10% of renewable gases, so it means that we will have transformed and, let's say, accelerated sufficiently to be on the good slope to handle this huge challenge. And it's also about employees. I think it's very important. So we will be successful if employees, I would say, are happy if they have developed the new skills needed and if they feel fully part of the solution.
Okay. So with the Loi Pacte, there's the new introduction of a new status for businesses called entreprises à mission. So really the businesses that integrate this new way of conducting business, this new way of seeing the environmental and social goals as being as valuable as the business goals. So is that something that you keep in mind also in terms of where your transition is going? Or is it, how does that factor in to your thinking?
Of course, as a CSR director, I'm really willing that we will make the next, the last move, let's say, to this step. But what is the main difference between, let's say, just having a raison d'être into your company, statutory and entreprise à mission, mission-led companies?
Yeah, mission-led companies.
Mission-led companies. It's mainly about governance. It's mainly about governance. It means that you will have clear commitments and targets, and I think we make sure that we already have them. But what is on top of that is the fact that you will have to associate more your stakeholders to the evaluation of your performance, the way you are implementing your raison d'être. First point. And second point, it's about indeed having an annual audit to make sure that all the informations you are providing are okay. And on our side, at least, we want to be inspired by this. So currently, we already have, let's say, a stakeholder advisory board. Okay, it's a nice body discussing mainly with our general manager. I'm part of it. But then the idea is really to change, or let's say to push this committee to become a real mission committee, so bringing on top a real independent evaluation on what we are doing, and also providing advices on the next step to be done. And of course, we will also transform the way we are making extra financial and financial reporting to create an integrated reporting that will include our raison d'être, strategy, the financial and extra financial performance. All this being, of course, audited.
Great.
So that at the end, the step to be done to become a mission-led company should be small and doable. But of course, it will be at the end the decision of our shareholders.
Of course. Of course, and so you've been here watching the entire conference today. What inspiration have you gotten from the other speakers that you've heard this morning?
I think if I had to keep in mind two words, it's of course acceleration. We are really feeling this need of acceleration now. It's really time to move. And the second one is collective. For example, Olivier from Kiloutou made clear that also in his company, the climate challenge, is not an individual challenge. I think it does not mean a lot when a company just say, myself, I'm climate neutral, it's done, I'm buying trees in Vietnam and compensation is okay. No, it's really a collective challenge. It's really by involving yourself with your suppliers, with your ecosystem, that we will progress collectively.
Well, thank you so much for that and for all the insights you've shared today.
Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. And I think what you just mentioned is a perfect closing word for our session today. What we've learned is that in order to organize change at the industry level, first of all, we know that it's possible. We know that solutions are already here and thriving, and we just need to support them even more. And lastly, and I'm continuing on my streak of making stupid word plays, but really, change is now. So thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for ChangeNOW for organizing this talk, and have a wonderful end of the summit.